Now, down here,
hold on, what did you say? You said the unification of two lands, and what was that? You said that after that?
by a Theban king.
What's in parentheses next to 3100 BC?
Unification. Next to 3100 BC, this word is unification. Okay? Now, a couple of things about the South. Couple of things about the South, what they call Upper Egypt or Upper Kim. A couple of things that's important is the existence of Nubia. Everybody knows Nubia, my Nubian brother. They try to tell us Nubia all the time, okay? But we're going to play off of that. The existence of Nubia in the South, that is an indication of it on its own. That most modern Americans don't have to be convinced about the blackness of that name, Nubia. Okay? Sudan. The word Sudan means black face. Okay? And Makuria. The reason why Makuria, I'm sorry, I don't want to use Makuria. I want to use Maru. We could use, but we're going to use Maru. The reason why, and that might be spelled wrong, but if you Google it, they'll give you the right spelling. The reason why we want to use Maru is because these are all places, these are all names of civilizations that the Western world will contest, or rather will agree that these are black civilizations. This is why I wanted to point out these. There are so many countries down here. But I wanted to point out these in particular because Nubia, Sudan, Maru are all terms that the Western world will associate with dark-skinned people, okay? Now notice that all of those places that have been what the Western world calls African strongholds, because they actually try to separate Africa from Kim. So they call these African strongholds, okay? Note that all of these so-called African strongholds are in the South. Keep that in mind. Black people in the South. Also, whenever indigenous people, whenever what they call African people, what the Western world calls African people, is pushed out of Lower Kim, the city of Memphis, and all of this up here is trade with Arabia and Asia and all of that over there. This is a trade route. So when the so-called Africans were pushed out of Lower Kim, they never went west and they never went north and they never went further east. They always went south. Note that they always went south. Check that in the encyclopedia if I'm lying. They will tell you the black people went south. The Africans went south. Okay? Or the African or the Theban. And they actually use this term, the Theban. And remember, Thebes is down here too. The Honorable Dr. Chancellor Williams will tell you that whenever you see the word Theban in the encyclopedia, they're referring to black people. Okay? So, note black people in the South. Now, we know that by what they call the Narmer Palette. It's called the Narmer Palette. That the king that unified both Upper and Lower Kim in 3100 BC, the king that unified Upper and Lower Kim, that they call Narmer, he wore the crown of the South. When the two lands were unified, his crown, along with the crown of the North, were put together. And they were made the crown of a unified Egypt, or a unified Kim. And that started in 3100 BC. Okay? So when that took place, they were telling you that this was a king from the South. Now, they rarely ever tell you what the unification was about. Rarely ever do they say that there was a war. A war for what? People like the Honorable Dr. Chancellor Williams will tell us that it was foreign people that were not indigenous to this land that were warring over trade routes with all kind of countries everywhere. This goes everywhere. This delta, it flows into everything. Okay? So these non-indigenous people were up here arguing and bickering and causing war and all kind of strife while the indigenous people down in Nubia and Sudan and Meru and Thebes were just living. So what it took, this is what Dr. Chancellor Williams will tell you, what it took was for an indigenous king to come up into Lower Kim and take control of the land of our people, okay? So this happened in 3100 BC. Now, what we are suggesting is that this was a black king from the south that came up here and that civilized non-indigenous people from other places up here. That's what we're suggesting. Go with it or not. But they know the unification took place in 3100 BC. That's 7,400 years after the Sphinx was built. This is their first dynasty. 3100 BC is their first dynasty. Now, we're going to move to 1633 BC. We're going to go from 3100 to 1633 BC. 1633 BC. Okay? Now this is the time that, again, and you know, some may give you 1627, some may give you 1632, 1634, but we're going to use 1633. Okay? This is when, I'm putting in parentheses here, Hyksos, Hyksos. This is when the Hyksos were expelled from Egypt, or from Kim. This is when the Hyksos were expelled from Kim. Okay? Now, they were allowed to live from 3100 to 1633. Somebody do that math for me. 3100 minus 1633. How many years is that?
1467.
That's 1467 years. So, Menes came up from the south, or Narmer, the Scorpion King. Menes, Aegyptos, Narmer, or the Scorpion King. All of those same people, same person. He came up in 3100 BC and told them, hey, y'all, chill out. I'm going to show y'all how to live. He gave them how many years?
1467.
He gave them 1467 years to live. To learn how to live, to learn to be civilized. And in 1633, finally, Ahmose I said, forget that, y'all gotta go. And this was called the expulsion of the foreign rulers, the Hyksos. They actually were appointed positions. They were given areas. This is where you see the non-indigenous pharaohs come into play. Because they always show you on the History Channel all of these really, really fair-skinned, thin-nosed, just perfectly preserved busts of these people. And they said, well, this was the pharaoh in the 14th dynasty.
So this was all from the Lower Kim. These are the people, or the Hyksos?
The Hyksos?
Yeah, the Hyksos.
The Hyksos are foreign. They're people from a different place.
So that's not Upper Kim? I mean Lower Kim?
They're in Lower Kim. From 3100 BC to 1633 BC, which is how many years?
1467.
1467 years. For 1467 years, they were allowed to live in Lower Kim.
Okay.
And they were actually allowed to come down into Upper Kim a little bit too.
Okay, so hold on. In 31 BC, it was the unification of both the North and the South Kim, right? So we're saying that in the South, it was black people. You got Sudan, Nubia, Meru, and in the Lower Kim was the indigenous people, and he unified them together. So you got the North and
No, the indigenous people, the black people is indigenous people. And Lower Kim was the foreigners. It was the people not indigenous. Indigenous means that they were created there. Since creation, they've been there.
Okay, so the Lower Kim was basically the high schools.
There were indigenous people all over Kim, but yeah, in Lower Kim, there were a lot of Hyksos, which means foreign rulers. There was a lot of Hyksos that came into Lower Kim because it was a decent trade route to Morocco, Algeria, Spain, all that stuff, Arabia, over here, Europe, all of that. You could go anywhere from here. This was like, and then it was the rich Delta region. These little things represent little